She was 75, quiet, polite, and trembling, as she stood at the counter of a crowded Los Angeles bank. The teller rolled her eyes. The manager smirked, and when the old woman asked why her savings were disappearing, they laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. But what they didn't know was that someone else was standing in line that day. A man in a black cap, silent, watching. And when he finally spoke, the entire room froze. "Why are you talking to her like that?" That single sentence would shatter a system built on arrogance, expose a secret hidden behind bank policy, and turn a moment of humiliation into one of the most unforgettable reversals ever caught on camera. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see how one stranger's voice changed everything. The first sound was paper-thin, trembling, and wet with sweat. Then came the voice that broke her. "Ma'am, I told you, if you can't keep enough money in your account, that's not our fault." The entire bank went quiet. SunWest National on Wilshire Boulevard was always loud, phones ringing, printers humming, customers sighing. But now even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Near the counter stood Evelyn Monroe, 75 years old, spine still straight despite the years that bent her world. She clutched a faded brown purse like it was armor. Inside were her pension slips, her bills, and a wrinkled envelope she'd been too afraid to open. She had come for one thing: to understand why the bank had started draining her savings. "I just want to know why there are new charges," she said softly. The teller, a young woman with glossy hair and boredom in her eyes, "Amber Leeds, didn't even look up their standard maintenance fees," she said, tapping the keyboard like the sound of judgment. "But I've had this account for 30 years, Evelyn insisted. "I never saw those before." Amber sighed dramatically, finally meeting her gaze, and smirking. "Well, maybe you should have read your terms before signing. It's all there in fine print." A few chuckles came from the line behind her. Evelyn's cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to being laughed at, not after a lifetime teaching children to read with patience and pride. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the receipt. "I did read it," she whispered, and Amber snatched the paper from her. "Look," she said, tapping a manicured finger on the bottom of the page. "That's your problem. You dropped below the balance threshold. Do you want respect? Keep more money." The laughter grew louder. Evelyn felt something in her chest twist, not from anger but from disbelief. She had survived her husband's long illness, paid every bill on time, and never once missed a payment. She wasn't here for charity, she was here for fairness. "Please," she said again, her voice breaking, "could you just check? Maybe there's been a mistake." Amber rolled her eyes and waved someone over. "Trent," she called. "Can you deal with this? She's not getting it." A man in a crisp suit approached, his tie as sharp as his smirk. "Trent Wilcox, branch manager." He looked Evelyn up and down as though measuring her worth in wrinkles and fabric. "Something wrong here?" he asked. "No," Amber said quickly, "just a misunderstanding about our policy." Evelyn turned toward him, summoning the courage that had carried her through decades of classrooms and loss. "Sir, I've been a customer here for a long time," she said. "I've always maintained my balance. But these new fees—" Trent raised a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, if you can't keep the minimum required amount, the fees apply. That's how banks stay in business." "I'm not asking for charity," she replied, her voice trembling but clear. "Just a fair look." He leaned closer over the counter, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the air. "Then maybe you should look somewhere else. Perhaps a credit union for retirees would suit you better." A ripple of laughter moved through the line again. Amber looked down, pretending to type. A security guard pretended not to hear. Evelyn stood frozen, her ears burned. She wanted to disappear, to shrink until the marble floor swallowed her whole. For a moment nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like flies on a wound. Then a voice, deep, calm: "Why are you talking to her like that?" The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Heads turned, even the security guards straightened. At the far end of the lobby, Near the doors, a man stood still, plain black t-shirt, jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. He hadn't moved before, hadn't spoken, but now every pair of eyes in the room was on him. Trent blinked. "Excuse me?" The man stepped forward slowly, his tone steady. "You heard me," he said. "Why are you talking to her like that?" Amber's hands froze on the keyboard. Evelyn turned slightly, heart racing, not sure if she should thank him or warn him away. Trent gave a half laugh. "Sir, this is none of your concern." But the stranger didn't stop. He took another step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Looks like it's everyone's concern now," he said. A hush fell, phones lowered, people leaned in. The stranger reached up, pulled off his cap, and the air shifted. For a second no one breathed. Then the whispers began. "Oh my God, is that? It can't be." It was. The man standing before them wasn't just any customer. It was Dominic Hale, the world-famous actor, known for playing heroes who never walked away from injustice. And at that moment, standing in a small neighborhood bank, defending a trembling old woman, he was playing the most important role of his life. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Amber's mouth hung open. Trent's confidence faltered. The customers in line, those same ones who had laughed seconds ago, now stared like they were witnessing a movie scene come alive. Dominic Hale took another step forward, quiet but commanding. The way he moved, slow, deliberate, made the whole room feel smaller. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder wrapped in calm. "Let me ask you something," he said, looking straight at Trent. "Is humiliating your customers part of your training, or just your hobby?" Trent blinked rapidly, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Hale," Dominic raised a hand. "Just Dominic," he said evenly. "We're all people here, right? Or is that a concept that gets lost behind the counter?" A murmur rolled through the room. Amber shifted uncomfortably, her fingers frozen above her keyboard. Ellen stood still, clutching her purse tighter. The disbelief on her face was raw. She couldn't quite decide if she should be grateful or terrified. Trent finally cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, this woman doesn't meet the account requirements. That's all. There's nothing more to it." Dominic tilted his head slightly. "That's not what I asked." He turned toward Evelyn, his tones softening like a man talking to his own mother. "Ma'am, what exactly happened?" Evelyn hesitated, the room spinning in her chest. "They've been charging me fees I never agreed to," she said quietly. "Small ones, but they add up. I tried to ask why, and," her voice faded as she glanced toward the teller. Amber looked away. Dominic nodded slowly. "You came here for an answer. You got humiliation instead." Then he looked back at Trent. "You're the manager. You represent this place, so let's do this right. Pull up her account." Trent let out a nervous chuckle. "Sir, that's confidential. You can't just—" Dominic's voice cut clean through him. "Her account. Now." Amber's hand trembled as she clicked her mouse. Her screen flickered blue, then filled with Evelyn's transaction history. The beeping of the computer keys was the only sound left in the room. Dominic leaned forward slightly, resting his hand on the counter. The scent of worn leather and faint cologne lingered in the air. Human, grounding, real. Amber swallowed. "Here it is," she whispered. Dominic's eyes scanned the screen, tracing the long list of deductions. He wasn't an accountant, but patterns were something he understood. Numbers that repeated like footsteps in a trap. "These charges started 2 months ago?" he asked. Amber nodded. "Yes, sir, after a policy update." He looked back at Trent. "And who signed off on that policy?" Trent straightened his tie. "Corporate did. We just follow the system." Dominic exhaled through his nose. Not angry yet, but disappointed, which somehow stung worse. "So let me get this straight," he said. "The system takes her money. You don't check why. And when she asks questions, you embarrass her." Trent's face turned red. "It's not like that. Then what is it like?" Dominic asked, voice rising slightly now. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like exploitation hiding behind a dress code." A few people clapped softly, one of those half-startled, involuntary reactions. when truth slips into the open. Amber looked at her manager. Trent, maybe we should quiet, he snapped. But the damage was already done. The mask had Dominic turned toward the growing crowd. Anyone else here notice new fees on your statements lately? He asked. The silence stretched, then a man in a janitor's uniform raised his hand. Yeah, my mom too. She's retired. They added a senior security charge. Whatever that means, a woman holding a stroller nodded. Mine too. Just started recently. More hands followed. Trent's Adam's apple bobbed. You don't understand how policy works, Mr. Hale. These are automated. Dominic's tone dropped to a low, dangerous calm. No, what's automated is greed. What's human is the choice to ignore it. Amber glanced up at him, eyes glistening now with something close to guilt. I didn't want to do it, she said quietly. He told us to push the premium accounts, even for senior customers. Said they wouldn't notice. Trent froze. You're done, someone muttered from the back. Dominic didn't gloat, he just looked at Evelyn. You were right to ask, he said softly. You were right to stand here. Don't ever apologize for expecting fairness. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange relief of finally being seen. I didn't think anyone would listen, she whispered. Dominic gave her a small, warm smile. They're listening now, he turned back to Trent. You're going to reverse those charges, every one of them. And you're going to apologize, not just to her but to everyone you thought was too small to matter. Trent stammered. Why you can't tell me how to… Dominic's voice cut him off, smooth and firm as stone. No, but the truth… The crowd erupted in whispers, phones out, cameras rolling. The story had just left the walls of SunWest Bank, and Trent Wilcox's empire of arrogance had begun to crumble. Trent's smile had turned into something else, tight, trembling, desperate. He tugged at his collar, realizing for the first time in years that power could evaporate faster than confidence. The man who had built his career on control was losing it, one heartbeat at a time. Mr. Hale, he said, his voice forced calm, you don't understand how business works. We can't reverse charges without… Dominic cut in, voice smooth as gravel. Without what? Permission? Or compassion? He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. The faintest smile tugged at his mouth, not amusement, but disbelief. You've been running this branch for how long? 8 years, Trent said automatically. Then you've had 8 years to learn the difference between policy and principle. The crowd murmured in agreement. Amber, still pale, tried to speak. Sir, maybe we should call corporate. Trent shot her a glare sharp enough to slice glass. Don't, he hissed. But Amber's trembling fingers betrayed her. The truth was already there, written in the data she'd just exposed on the glowing screen. Dominic turned to the watching customers. How many of you were told about these new fees? Silence. How many of you were notified in writing, like the law requires? Still silence. Then a single voice, a man in a postal uniform, said, None of us. Dominic nodded. That's what I thought. He gestured to the computer. Amber, scroll down. The teller obeyed, her finger tracing down the list of accounts, names, balances, and the same pattern repeating. Senior customers, long-term accounts, all hit with quiet deduction. Dominic exhaled slowly, the air thick with disbelief. This isn't a mistake, he said softly. It's a strategy. Trent barked a laugh, a brittle sound meant to sound confident, but breaking halfway through. That's ridiculous. Dominic looked at him. Really? You know what's ridiculous? That you think no one's watching. Someone near the back lifted a phone higher, the camera light blinking red. Another followed. Half the bank was recording now. Trent noticed too late. Dominic's tone dropped an octave. You humiliate the elderly. You take their money under false pretenses. And now you're going to tell me it's just policy? Trent stuttered. It came from upper management. Dominic smiled faintly. Then call them. I'll wait. The line broke into laughter, sharp, honest laughter this time. Trent's cheeks flushed crimson. He could feel the walls closing in, the whispers, the lenses, the eyes. Evelyn stood motionless. One hand pressed over her chest, her breath caught between fear and awe. In all her years, she had never seen a man dismantle cruelty so calmly. Dominic wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was simply holding up a mirror, and Trent couldn't stand his reflection. Amber cleared her throat softly. Sir, I checked something. Trent snapped. What now? She turned the screen toward him, toward everyone. The fees began right after you authorized the system update. Your name's right there. A collective gasp rolled through the room. Trent's jaw dropped open, words failing him for the first time. Dominic's gaze sharpened. You changed the structure yourself. You did, Dominic said. And you counted on no one noticing. You underestimated the wrong woman. He turned toward Evelyn, his voice softening again. You've spent your life helping others understand what words mean, he said. Today your words reminded everyone what respect means. Evelyn blinked back tears. I just wanted to be heard, Dominic smiled gently. Now you are. The tension shifted. People nodded. One woman whispered, She's brave. Another man clapped once. Then again, soon half the room joined in. Trent's composure finally cracked. Stop filming, he barked. You can't record in here, Dominic chuckled quietly. Funny, you didn't mind the audience when you were humiliating her. The applause grew louder. Even the security guard, who'd pretended not to see earlier, crossed his arms and looked away from Trent. Amber, Dominic said calmly, reverse the charges. She hesitated, glancing at Trent. He didn't move. Dominic tilted his head. That wasn't a suggestion. Amber's fingers flew across the keyboard. The screen flashed green. Line by line, Evelyn's stolen fees disappeared. Dominic turned to the crowd. Check your accounts, every one of you. If they did it to her, they did it to others. Phones buzzed, apps opened, gasps filled the room. It's true, someone said. They took money from me too. Another voice. Me as well. The truth was out now. Irreversible, undeniable. Trent tried one last desperate card. This is harassment. You'll regret this. Dominic stepped closer, his expression cool. I regret nothing that puts dignity back where it belongs. And for a long, powerful moment, the two men locked eyes, one trembling, one unshakable. Then Dominic turned slightly toward Evelyn, offering his arm. Let's finish this, he said softly. Evelyn took it, her hand fragile but steady. Together, they walked toward the center of the room. The crowd parting like a tide, Dominic stopped, turned, and faced the stunned manager. You've spent years building this branch on fear and silence, he said. But the thing about silence is, once it breaks, it never goes back. The lobby erupted in applause. Phones rose higher. Outside, the sound carried through the glass doors into the street. And for the first time in that bank's history, truth had a witness strong enough to be heard. The applause faded into a charged silence, that kind of stillness right before thunder. Trent Wilcox stood frozen behind the counter, his tie slightly crooked, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed near his temple. His world, his perfect marble world, was cracking in front of 100 witnesses. Amber stared at her trembling hands, afraid to meet his eyes. Customers were still checking their phones, whispering numbers and pointing at their statements. Every click, every gasp, was a nail in the coffin of Trent's authority. Then came the sound that changed everything. The shrill ping of a phone notification. The young man in the janitor's uniform, the same one who had first spoken up, turned his screen for everyone to see. Liv, he said, grinning. You're trending, man. Trent blinked confused. What? Amber whispered, horrified. Someone's streaming this. It's all over social media. Dominic didn't even look surprised. You wanted an audience, Trent, he said calmly. Now you've got one. Trent's eyes darted around the lobby, at the cameras, the staring faces, the knowing smiles. This is slander, he barked. I'll sue every single one of you. Dominic shook his head slowly. You can't sue the truth. Then, as if on cue, the bank phone began to ring. Loud, piercing, relentless. Amber reached for it, but Trent snatched the receiver. This is SunWest National, Wilcox speaking, he said, trying to sound composed. The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, unmistakably corporate. Trent Wilcox, we're watching the footage. Step into your office, now. The line went dead. The color drained from his face. Dominic folded his arms, watching silently. The power dynamic had flipped completely. The man who once ruled through fear was now trembling under a stranger's calm gaze. Trent opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked smaller now, somehow, like the weight of his own arrogance had finally caught up. Evelyn spoke quietly, almost to herself. People like him don't listen until the world forces them to. Dominic gave a faint smile. Then let's make sure he listens. He turned toward the counter, voice steady. Amber, how much was taken from Mrs. Monroe's account in total? Amber checked the screen. $672, sir. Dominic nodded. Refund it, now. Trent snapped. You can't just. Dominic's glare silenced him. You're right, she can. Amber's fingers flew across the keyboard. The transfer processed with a single chime. Evelyn's account balance blinked back to life, restored. Dominic turned toward Trent again. Now, about that apology, Trent scoffed. Apology? You're insane. Dominic stepped closer, his shadow falling across the counter. His tone was calm, but something in it, the quiet authority, the absolute control, froze the air itself. No, I'm awake, he said softly. You're the one who's been sleeping through his own decency. Trent's throat worked as he swallowed. Around them, phones were still recording. No way out. Dominic gestured toward Evelyn. You humiliated this woman in front of strangers. You called her poor, lazy, unworthy. You made her beg for what was rightfully hers, and you did it because you thought no one would care. Trent looked down at the counter. His reflection stared back, pale, sweating, pitiful. Dominic's voice softened. Be a man for once. Do the right thing. The silence stretched, then broke. Trent inhaled sharply, his voice thin. Mrs. Monroe, he said, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Dominic raised an eyebrow. Trent sighed shakily. I apologize for how I treated you. It was wrong. Evelyn blinked, stunned. For the first time that day, she saw fear not in her own heart, but in his. Dominic nodded slightly. Good, now mean it. Trent met Evelyn's gaze. I'm sorry, he said again. Quieter this time, but real. Evelyn didn't gloat. She simply nodded, her eyes soft. Thank you. The room erupted again, this time in genuine applause. Dominic waited for it to settle before turning to the customer. Check your statements, he said. Every senior, every account. Don't just trust a system to do right, make sure it does. He looked at Evelyn once more, smiling faintly. You did this, ma'am. You showed them that silence isn't peace, it's just permission. Evelyn's voice wavered. I didn't mean to start all this. You didn't start it, Dominic said gently. You stopped it. The applause grew louder. The security guard held the door open. Dominic placed his cap back on, nodded once to Evelyn, and stepped into the sunlight. Outside, the California afternoon glowed, golden, blinding after the storm inside. The crowd followed him with their eyes until the door closed. Evelyn exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Her knees were weak, but her heart felt strong. Amber turned toward her, whispering, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Monroe. We should have treated you better. Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. Then start now. Treat the next person better. Behind them, Trent's office door slammed shut, but it was too late. The story had already left the building, and by the time Dominic Hale disappeared down Wilshire Boulevard, the world had already begun to watch. By the next morning, the story had escaped the walls of SunWest National and spread across the internet like fire chasing dry grass. The headline appeared everywhere within hours. Actor defends elderly woman in Los Angeles bank. Justice served live. Clips flooded social media. Shaky phone videos, capturing the exact moment Dominic Hale pulled off his cap and stared down the smug bank manager. Millions watched. Millions shared. The world loves heroes. But this time it loved the woman who'd stood her ground even more. Inside SunWest headquarters, panic turned into policy. Calls flew between executives, legal teams, and PR departments. By noon, the corporate statement dropped. SunWest National is aware of the incident that occurred at our Wilshire branch. We have launched an internal review. The behavior displayed does not reflect our values, but by then values were already the least of their worries. By evening, Trent Wilcox had been suspended indefinitely. Amber was questioned for hours, but when she admitted she'd been ordered to target seniors for account upgrades, the company had no choice but to let the blame land where it belonged. Trent's face, once smug, confident, was now plastered across news segments under the words "unethical practices exposed." He tried to spin it, claiming he'd been taken out of context. But context didn't save him when the footage of Evelyn's humiliation replayed on national television. The following week, SunWest announced full restitution to all affected senior customers, refunds, public apologies, and a new ethics initiative titled the Monroe Standard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For Evelyn Monroe, life returned to its simple rhythm: tea at dawn, her cat asleep on the windowsill, and the rustle of newspapers reminding her that the world could still surprise her. She didn't crave attention, but every knock on her door reminded her that she had become something more than a customer. She was a symbol. Reporters called, neighbors brought flowers, former students wrote letters saying, "You taught us to use our voice. Now you've reminded us what that means." One afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, sunlight cutting through the lace curtains. Her phone buzzed. Another message. This one was different. A private number. No text, just a short voicemail. She pressed play. "Hi, Mrs. Monroe. It's Dominic." A pause, his voice softer now, stripped of cameras and crowds. "I wanted to say thank you. You didn't need me that day. You already had the courage. I just helped the world see it. You reminded me why I started doing what I do in the first place." Evelyn covered her mouth, smiling through quiet tears. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No company logo, no return address, just her name, handwritten in bold ink. Inside was a simple note on creamy stationery. "You didn't need a hero, Evelyn. You reminded one how to act like one. Dominic Hale." And beneath that, 2 glossy tickets to a film premiere. A sticky note attached read, "Front row seats. You deserve to see the world stand up for someone else." For once, Evelyn laughed softly, the kind of laugh that sounded like an exhale of everything heavy. She set the note beside her teacup, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. The weeks rolled forward. The viral video eventually faded from trending lists, replaced by news scandals, new stories, but in quiet corners of the internet, people still shared that moment. The trembling old woman standing tall, the stranger stepping forward, the hush before decency returned to the room. Amber, the young teller, transferred to another branch, but she carried something different with her now: humility. She made sure to greet every elderly customer with patience, no matter how long their questions took. And somewhere downtown, the corporate office kept a framed photo of Evelyn shaking hands with the new regional director. Underneath it read, "Policy changes lives, but so does kindness." Months later, on a warm evening, Evelyn attended the premiere. The lights, the cameras, the red carpet, it all felt unreal. When Dominic Hale saw her arrive, he smiled and crossed the velvet rope, ignoring the flashing cameras. He took her hand gently and whispered, "Told you I'd save you a seat." Evelyn chuckled. "You already did." As the theater lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life, Evelyn glanced sideways. For a brief second, she didn't see the movie star. She saw the man who'd seen her. And in that quiet darkness, she realized something she'd always taught her students: Sometimes courage doesn't shout. It stands in line. It waits patiently. It asks questions. And sometimes it inspires someone powerful enough to make the world listen. When the credits rolled, applause filled the room. But for Evelyn Monroe, the real applause had come long before, in a small neighborhood bank, on a day that began with humiliation and ended with hope. Some heroes fight villains. Some just remind the world to be kind again. But the rarest ones, they make courage contagious. Fade out.